send a message to our Blacc group. Did it ask you for a password when you tried to log in?
So it asked me to either put in a password or use the link that you sent. So okay. That's why it took me a little bit longer. I had to go backwards and find the original link.
Okay, I'm just gonna send the password to the group just in case.
About how much time do you have allocated for this?
So the entire study group is 2 hours, but like usually when I talked with the vineyard manager for like an hour, 45 minutes. And then after that, we started our regular study session. So like, I feel like it'd probably be like an hour for you and then like our regular study session.
Okay, cool. So I'll be on for an hour then, is what you're saying. Okay, cool. It's good for me to know because sometimes I can talk and talk and talk, or I can keep things more compact.
Well, it's meant to be like more like the way that I like to educate people about wine is just to make it more about conversation while we're still spitting out some knowledge. So a lot of knowledge, as a matter of fact. So like, talk as much as you want. And if you can't think of something to say, there's questions that I have prepared to guide the conversation. And then I'm sure people in the group will ask questions too. So we'll start off with questions by me and you explaining everything that you do. And then after that, we'll open it up for questions from everybody in the group. All right, and so people are starting to come. All right.
Oh, sorry, I was such a spaz. I couldn't find the link. How are you guys?
We are.
Hi, Andrea. Nice to finally meet you.
You too.
Hi, Tuani.
Hi, how are you?
Hi, Lennox.
Hello, how are you?
Good. It's a beautiful sunny day here.
It is. Same here.
Lockdown, God knows what day, 16 or something crazy like that here. You guys have almost made it through 1 week of your lockdown. How's it going?
1 week, no, 1 week today, right?
Yeah, or tomorrow or something officially. I don't know. Didn't it start at like midnight? Technically Friday. Who cares? But yeah, like so, almost a week. Do you still have enough wine? I think Andrea's fine for wine, right?
Yeah. No, we're stocked up.
Yes. Oh boy.
Okay, so you're going to get started just to be respectful of everyone's time. I'm going to mute everyone right now. And then after we finish a short conversation with Andrea, then we can All right, so welcome everyone to the Blacc Study group. Just in case some of you are new to Blacc, you don't know exactly what Blacc is. Blacc is professional club where we have professionals in the wine industry who want to learn more about wine, who practice like wine or spirits in their everyday life. They're restaurant managers, sommeliers, tasting managers, winemakers. Every point in the value chain, we have somebody in that group in Blacc, and it's an international organization. We have members here in Cape Town and also. And today we have a very, very special guest who I'm super excited. This person is so awesome. I texted her, I emailed her right away. She was just like, sure, I'll do it. I would love to. So I'm excited to do it. We have Andrea Mullineux from Mullineux Wines. And she's also my homegirl. So she's from the United States. And we are both on lockdown. Welcome to the Blacc platform. How are you?
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Hi, everyone. Sorry.
So Andrea, can you just tell us a little bit about who you are? So what's your official title at Mullineux, and how did Mullineux just come about? Like, what's your passion part of this project?
Cool. So yeah, I'm a co-owner and winemaker. My husband and I started the winery in 2007. So we were still, in our 20s at the time. We were working for other wineries. So we were very kind of dreamy about the whole winemaking thing. We were both qualified winemakers. I studied in California and came to South Africa for what was supposed to be a 3-month internship. And then, yeah, while we were still young and didn't have bonds on our houses or kids, we had a dog, and we said, okay, let's start our own winery, because if we don't do it now, then we'll have to wait another 20 years, until we have kids and they're out of college and everything. So that's how we started.
Nice. Now your husband, Chris, right?
Yes. Yeah,
Is he on?
Sorry, it cut out there.
Oh, you could go ahead.
Yeah, sorry, it cut out. So I didn't hear everything you said, but Chris is South African and he studied winemaking at Stellenbosch. He actually studied to be a accountant first, developed his passion for wine while studying accountancy, and decided that he didn't want to be an accountant, had his midlife crisis at 22 years old, and then went back and studied viticulture. And so with his viticulture degree, worked very well with my winemaking degree, and we got together. And so, yes, I do everything in the winery from, we do picking decisions together, but I do the, fermentation, cellar management, bottling, finishing the wines. But he manages the vineyards along with the viticulturalist, Risser Kruger, who's quite famous for working with old vines. So that's really the direction we've gone in with Mullineux, working with old vines. Sorry, I have this annoying fly flying around me right now. It keeps landing on my face. With Chris and I together, we make all the picking and blending decisions together, but he manages everything in the vineyards and I manage everything in the winery.
Oh gosh, that makes it so awesome. So you guys both have your own little houses per se. Yes. How is it though? So we're going through a world crisis right now. It's really uncertain times and unprecedented times with COVID-19. How is it being so far away from home? Or is the United States like a far memory for you? Yeah,
I mean, it's crazy how international this has become. So it is hard being away from home. In fact, today I was supposed to fly to the US for my mother's 70th birthday. So yeah, that's probably one of the bigger bummers for me, but it's for a greater good. We're all in this together. We all have to beat this together. But it is hard being away from my American family, but I do have, my South African family here too. So, we're all a support structure. The wine business itself is like one big family, whether it's not just people making wine, but in the vineyards, in the restaurants, we're all in this together. And because wine is not considered an essential item, I don't know why not, because it's absolutely essential. So it is causing a lot of problems in the business right now. We luckily, this time last week, we weren't even allowed to finish harvest. There's, we personally were finished, but the wine business as a whole, there's still, well, as of last week, there were still 35,000 tons hanging in South Africa, and the government said, you're not allowed to touch it anymore. So then by Friday, we knew through Vinpro, who is the kind of governing board of wine in South Africa, that that lobbies with the government and helps to communicate between the government and the wineries. They did an amazing job lobbying sort of against these rules and allowing us to at least finish harvest. So people are allowed to finish picking, we're allowed to finish the primary harvest, but as of today, we're still not allowed to sell or export. So it's not just the 3-week lockdown that we're worried about, it's what it means for everyone else. Restaurants are gonna have harder times staying open than they were a month ago. That's the reality. And so our customers are also going to have problems. But as of right now, we've been allowed to finish harvest, and 2020 is looking like one of our best harvests yet. So kind of this bittersweet situation.
Yeah, there is a little bit of a silver lining in that, at least we will have some good juice. Like when this is all like a memory and we're talking about we survived Corona, I think that, at least we'll have something good to drink. How has the harvesting process changed since COVID-19? Has it affected the winery directly besides, I think it's terrible, this whole 21-day lockdown and no sales of wine. I'll just go on record as saying I don't agree with that. But what other things have changed?
Well, it's quite interesting because in the winery, we have to practice social distancing as well. So right now we're working just on skeleton crews, but when the first phase of social distancing started, wineries, you have to work quite close with people. To lift a barrel, you need 2 people and you're this far apart from each other. So to be as careful as possible, extra sanitizing. Last year, this time, all winemakers' hands are just that like dark red color just from working with wine. This year, because we're sanitizing nonstop like the whole rest of the country, our hands are like squeaky clean. It looks like we haven't worked, but they've been stripped.
I'm used to seeing purple fingernails.
Yeah, no, we've had our hands in a lot of sanitizing solution, because in wineries in general, they're very sanitary environments. Wine is food. It is a natural product. Even if people ferment on a more commercial level, it's still yeast, positive bacteria, fermentation, everything's alive. Everything can be potentially unstable and unstabilized if you are not careful with the sanitation in the winery. So wineries are already very clean places, and with COVID-19, even more.
I could imagine. I worked harvest for Tutorin one year, and it was mostly cleaning. Like being a winemaker is not all glamorous. It's mostly cleaning tanks, cleaning barrels, cleaning the floor, cleaning everything.
And when you're done, you start again.
Yes. So let's start talking about some of the winemaking process. So can you please because this is a study group, and so we're basically following the WSET study book. And so right now we're in the chapter where we're talking about the winemaking process. Can you just walk us through the process, please?
Absolutely. So the first thing is with wine, everything starts in the vineyards. And we have 2 main colors of grapes, red grapes and white grapes. And the interesting thing about red wine from red grapes is the skin of the grapes is a black color, but the inside is still, for most varieties, the same color as the inside of a white grape. So we have to talk about it in 2 different processes, and I'll start with white grapes. So the first thing in the vineyard is that we are checking the sugars, the flavors, the natural acidity, everything has to be in balance. And you can either measure it with equipment, or you can do it just by taste, by knowing your vineyard and where you would normally like to pick it. And then the idea, then when it's at the optimum ripeness, you bring it into the winery. You ideally want to bring grapes in as cool as possible. So most harvesting takes place very early in the morning, or even from late at night, and they'll bring lights into vineyards. The reason why you want it to be cool is as soon as grapes get to a certain temperature, they can potentially break easier, because cold things are firmer, warm things are softer. And if they break and they're warm, they actually might start fermenting sooner than you want them to. So to help control the quality of the grapes, and then therefore the wine at the end, we harvest the grapes very cool. And with white grapes, then they go typically straight to a press. We have different types of presses. One is called a basket press, which is maybe the old-fashioned. I can actually show you on the back of one of my bottles. We actually have a basket press as our barcode. So a basket press,
Very cool.
where you have it's a round conical press. The grapes go in and top, and then you have a crank system that pushes the grapes down, and the juice comes out. The other main type of press is a pneumatic press, where literally it's a big cylinder like a can, except on one half of the inside, there's a big balloon. And when you put the grapes in, and then you pump up the balloon, and it squeezes the grapes very gently, and then the juice comes out that way. They both achieve the exact same thing, getting the juice away from the skins and the pips. Now, the juice is much sweeter than table grape juice would be, at least twice as sweet. So when the juice comes in, you measure the sugar levels to determine what you want to do with the wine, with the potential wine, if you need to add any nutrients, if you need to do any adjustments. In some countries, you're allowed to add sugar if the juice is not sweet enough. But in warm countries like South Africa, we're not allowed to add sugar. We have the opposite problem. Sometimes we don't have enough natural acidity. So in South Africa, we are allowed to add the same natural acid that is already present in the grapes, but just to bump it up a little bit more. Then the fermentation process starts either naturally, indigenous yeast, where the yeast that grow on the outside of the skins of the grapes are actually what will start the fermentation. So it's almost like the sourdough of grape fermentations, in that you let the natural yeast take over. That's a method that we prefer for its complexity. The other method is that you can buy yeast in a packet from wine supply companies, and that's called an inoculation, where you prepare the yeast and you add it to the juice. At the end of the day, both juices start fermenting. Commercial yeast is more of a controlled situation, because it is, you know exactly what yeast you're working with. You know what the yeast is good for. You can buy different kinds of yeast, ones that are more famous for creating more fruit characteristics or more floral aromatics. Wild or indigenous yeast, it's a little bit more of a mixed bag, so it's slightly higher risk. And then the next phase is obviously the fermentation. So now there's yeast and the fermentation starts. You know, even though my title is the winemaker, I always joke, like, I could not do this without the yeast. They're the ones that are actually making the wine. So the yeast is taking the sugar molecules and turning that sugar molecule into carbon dioxide, and the most important part, the alcohol. So when grapes are fermenting, or when juice is fermenting, the fermentation process gives off a lot of gas, a lot of carbon dioxide. So it actually looks like it's bubbling, like it's boiling, but it's the carbon dioxide coming off that the yeast are making. Then, when the sugar is at the level you desire, for the most part, you want it to be as close to zero as possible. then the wine is ready to settle and to age. So the aging process, also called élevage, as they refer to it in France, like the raising of the wine. You can choose to keep it in stainless steel tank or any vessel, or you can put it in barrels. And the time you leave it in the barrel or the other vessel is up to the winemaker. So typically you want to keep your vessels as full as possible for as long as possible. So your average cycles are normally just under a year, so that you can open it up again for the next vintage, or then close to 2 years. You work on cycles where you can keep your barrels full, but there's no set amount of time. In fact, in South Africa, the first 2020 wines would normally be hitting the shelves about now. In fact, they might have already been released. So some people only age the wine for 1 month after fermentation. But then there's famous regions in the world, like in Rioja, where they famously age their wine for sometimes 5 years or longer, depending on the winemaking style. So that's white grapes. Then the process or any questions about white grapes before I go on to red grapes?
Just raise your hand if you have a question, or put a comment. Well, let me see. Let me unmute everyone for a second. Okay. Any questions? Okay, 5, 4, 3, 2.
Hi, sorry. Hi, Tuani. Hi, Andrea. Hi, everybody. Thank you for that very interesting introduction. When it comes to the natural fermentation that you use from the bloom on the grapes, is that not very unpredictable? How can you be sure of the end result? Or is that something that you just sort of hope for the best?
Yes, it is high risk. So I refer to it as high risk, high reward. The important thing to start with is that you have health. So if you have vineyards that are diseased with mildew or rot, mildew and rot are a fungus. Yeast is also a fungus. So they're going to negatively interact with each other. So by having healthy vineyards, you're more likely to have a healthy natural yeast. So that for us is step number 1. So yes, high risk, high reward. You don't always know the end product, but if your vineyard is healthy year on year and you've been able to experiment with your healthy vineyards and therefore healthy yeast, and you know your outcome, then you can more or less know the general direction that fermentation is going to go in, and more or less the end result. However, if you found that your fermentation was not favorable for what you're looking for, maybe the natural yeast fermentation is not the best idea.
Very good. Okay, so I think that's all for the white wine questions. We can move on to the reds.
Okay, so with red grapes, so same idea of measuring the sugars and having an idea of what your sugar level is before you bring the grapes in. Each country has a different way of measuring it. Some overlap. So some measure on potential alcohol, specific gravity, bricks. In South Africa, we use balling, which is more or less a grams 100 ml measurement. So for example, typically white grapes are picked between 20 and 24 balling, just to give an idea. So that would be like up to 240 grams a liter. And red grapes tend to be picked a little bit higher in sugar. The reason being is you have to wait not just for the juice to taste right, but now you have to wait for the skins to ripen as well. Because remember, as I said, that the skins are where red wine gets the color from. So if you have underripe skins, you won't get as much color coming out of the grapes. And you'll have unripe flavors as well. So, more green, harsh, more tannic flavors will come out of underripe grapes when you're working with red wine. So that's why we wait a little bit longer for the grapes to be optimally ripe with red wine. So instead of going straight to the press when we bring it to the winery, we put it straight to a tank. Some people choose to chill the grapes down even more, and that's called cold maceration. So I'm going to take one step back. See, I'm a winemaker, not a lecturer, so I make mistakes here. So when you bring the grapes to the winery to get them into the tank, you need to decide, are you going to keep them entire, which means you keep the grapes on the stems, sometimes uncrushed, sometimes crushed. So uncrushed grapes will be for if you want to do a carbonic maceration, which is another level of red wine making, but Beaujolais Nouveau would be a good example of carbonic wines. Then you can do whole clusters, but crushed whole clusters, which is a style that we employ quite a bit, where you leave the grapes attached to the berries, but you still crush it, whether it's with your feet or with a machine. But the most typical modern way of getting the grapes into the tank is to first put the grapes through what's called a destemmer. And that's where the berries are mechanically plucked away from the stems, and the stems end up in a pile that will go into your compost, and all the grapes then make it into the tank. So at this point, then winemakers decide, do they want to do a cold maceration, which prevents the onset of fermentation because you keep the grapes really cold. But the reason why some winemakers decide to do that is so that they can extract more color out of the skins, and to help stabilize that color as well. Because as soon as you have alcoholic fermentation, you start to extract other things out of the grapes as well, and not just the color. So if you can slow down the onset of fermentation, you're extracting lots of color and lots of flavor out, but not tannin, for example. And then the fermentation can start in the same way as the white grapes, whether it's an indigenous fermentation or an inoculated fermentation. And when the wine starts to ferment and is turning the sugar, the yeast are turning the sugar into carbon dioxide and alcohol, the difference between white wine, which has no skins, and red wine, which has all the skins, is that the gas keeps pushing the skins back up to the top of the tank. And so what you need to do in the winery at that point is constantly be pushing those skins back down into the wine to create the extraction process of color and tannin that you're controlling, as well as keeping the cap healthy. So back to the idea of hygiene, a dry cap, when it's pushed up to the top, can become unhealthy. You can develop negative bacteria growing on top. So by keeping the cap, which is the skin layer that floats to the top, by keeping it down inside the vessel, you end up with the extraction and a healthier fermentation. In both red and white wine, controlling the temperature during fermentation is pretty important, because if you let a fermentation get too hot, it will actually kill the yeast. If you let the fermentation get too cold, the fermentation will come to almost a stop. So yeast like to live in a certain temperature range, or they like to ferment in a certain temperature range. And that's up to the discretion of the winemaker. Cooler ferments tend to be more aromatic, more primary fruit characteristics. Warmer ferments tend to move more into spicier characteristics. And then when the fermentation is complete, or at the point that the fermentation has extended long enough where the sugar has reduced to the level that the winemaker desires, as well as the extraction and the tannin levels, then the winemaker will choose to also press it. So where white grapes are pressed at the very beginning of the process, red grapes are pressed at the very end. So after the fermentation is complete, then the grapes can be moved into one of the two presses I spoke about earlier. Either, well, there's other ways to press as well, but those are the two main ones that we work with.
Oh my goodness, that was so good. I know you said you're not a lecturer, but you really did break it down for I know for me, for sure.
Okay.
Let's see if there's any questions. I'm going to unmute everyone. Or maybe you can just tell me who has a question because it gets so loud. Anybody? I'll just mute you guys. Any questions? All right. So no questions. I think I have a couple questions. So let's see. Okay, so I have a question about when you said that it's too hot. When it's too hot, it kills the yeast, right? And so is that a technique that some people use on purpose to make sweeter wines?
Typically not to make sweeter wines because you cannot, although fermentations naturally want to get hot because it's action, it's alive, so it's generating heat in the process of eating the sugar and creating alcohol and CO2, but the heat would be very hard to control unless you have a way to heat up the tank. So although it will kill a fermentation to get it to that temperature, not all fermentations want to get to that temperature necessarily. But pasteurization is another process where you can kill yeast with heat pasteurization, but the wine would already have to be pressed in order to do that. So yes, actually to answer your question, by heating up a tank from natural fermentation, you would not be able to necessarily control whether or not you're going to stop the yeast, but by pasteurizing it through another vessel, through a more scientific method of doing a flash heat pasteurization, you would absolutely be able to stop a fermentation and kill the yeast.
And so, but that's after the juice is already pressed. So that's after it kind of goes through its first fermentation phase, and then you press the juice off. After you press the juice off, and it inoculates with the yeast, right? And then you will put it in another vessel to technically stop it. Is that what you're saying?
Yes. So there's a few different ways to stop a fermentation. One would be to chill it down very quickly because it's much easier to control how cold the tank gets than how hot a tank gets. Okay. The other would be to add a lot of sulfur. Sulfur is an antioxidant and it prevents yeast from being able to function. And then, one of the third main methods would be pasteurization to stop a fermentation. But with pasteurization, there's always going to be like maybe a slight cooking element to it as well. But you want to make sure, if you're going to go to those extremes, you want to make sure that it's not going to start again. You wouldn't want to try and stop a fermentation with any of those methods, and then it unexpectedly starts again. So making sure that a wine is as stable as possible ahead of time would be favorable to ensuring the stability later.
Okay. I think, does anybody else have any questions regarding that? I think she explained it pretty well. All right. So can you tell me, I guess you already covered it because I was just going to ask you what are some of the biggest challenges when you're fermenting the wine, but I guess controlling the temperature is probably one of them, right? What varietals do you guys make at Mullineux? And also, what varietals do you guys specialize in at Mullineux?
So for Mullineux, it's predominantly Syrah and Chenin Blanc. Chenin being, Chenin, the nickname is Steen in South Africa, and that means stone, because it's the cornerstone of white grapes in South Africa. A lot of the wine industry in South Africa was based on Chenin Blanc, and we work predominantly with old vine Chenin Blanc from Mullineux. Old vines are now a classifiable category in South Africa. So the Old Vineyard, the Heritage Vineyard Project, Old Vine Project, run by Andre Morgenthal, is just an amazing organization where vineyards are classified and registered. And so now, in order to say old vines, you have to be working with registered vineyards. And then for our Syrah, very little of it is considered old vine. There are old vines in South Africa. They've been in the country. Well, the oldest Syrah vines are not older than about 50 years old, but Syrah's been in the country for more than 100 years. The Syrah or Shiraz that you find in Australia actually originally came through South Africa, which I think is just awesome. So even though Australia has some of the oldest Syrah vines in the world, they all came from original cuttings from South Africa. So
oh, nice.
They were here first.
That is a really cool fact.
But our vineyards are, for our Syrah, tend to be slightly younger. I'm not dogmatic about much, but I don't want to work with unhealthy vines, as I mentioned earlier. And unfortunately, before the early 90s, there was a big problem with virus in South Africa. It's a problem that still exists today. But in the 90s, the nurseries that supply the vines started look, quarantine is the word of the month right now, but their own quarantine programs to isolate healthy vines and then only propagate healthy vines. And so we're quite strict about only working with healthy Syrah vines. So pretty much from the mid-90s on.
Now, is that something that to find out if a vine is healthy or not, is that something that you depend on your vineyard manager to communicate that with, or do you just base that basically on like the history of the vine? Like you just do some research? Do you look at the vine and can you tell if it's healthy or not? How do you know if it's a healthy vine?
All of the above. so you can test a vine, but testing is incredibly expensive. So visually is your first indicator. So when you see vineyards that are that like deep, dark purple color in autumn, where it's very beautiful for a postcard, it is not usually beautiful for the winery. Virus vineyards typically express that, or one of the main viruses really expresses that dark purple color, and the leaf actually curls a little bit, and that's why it's called leaf roll virus. It arrests the proper ripening, the phenolic ripening of the grapes. So although the grapes will still hang, and the grapes, I mean, nothing will hurt you from eating the grapes, but they just don't develop the flavor, the sugar, the right skin ripeness that I was talking about for making a higher end wine.
Very cool. And so I know this, that you get your grapes from Swartland, right? And Swartland's a very unique, interesting region. It's an up and coming region, and it's known for just like having this very eclectic like wine scene. Is there a reason that you picked Swartland out of all the other regions in South Africa or the Western Cape?
Yeah, I mean, so 15 years ago, the Swartland was more known for its wheat and its grains than it was for grapes. And there were not that many wineries here, just a handful of wineries. And it's a very rustic region. It's hot, it's dry, it's breezy. So it's super conducive for natural farming, which was one of the main reasons that drew us to the region. But also, as I mentioned, when we first started making wine from the Swartland, we were still in our 20s. And so it was, to be honest, more affordable to start in than Stellenbosch, than more famous regions. But because it wasn't a famous region, there was access to amazing fruit that was not already being claimed by other wine producers. So when we started Mullineux, we didn't own any of our own vineyards. We didn't own any buildings to start with. We just rented vineyards and rented equipment where we could. And so to start a business with very low capital, starting in the Swartland with rented amazing vineyards that were old vines and varieties that we really wanted to work with, as well as being able to rent space to do the fermentations in, was very suited to our earlier business model. And since then, we've been able to purchase a lot of the original vineyards that we worked with, which takes everything for me to the next level. When you own the land, everything gets elevated because you're living in the vineyards, you're walking in the vineyards. But there are plenty of amazing farmers in the Swartland that really take it seriously, that even if you don't own your own vineyards, you're still going to be working with amazing grapes because we've got old vines, healthy vineyards. The weather plays the part. As I mentioned, this Mediterranean climate we have here, very low disease pressure in general. It all adds up to being able to make some amazing wines without necessarily a 200-year family history behind you.
Just for a personal question, sorry everybody, but could you, is there a region in the United States that Swartland would remind you of, like you can compare it to if you had to?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, weather-wise, like the central coast of California, well, down near like Paso Robles, for example, where they're working with a lot of Syrah, for example. You know, it's warmer than Napa or Sonoma in California. But yes, I would definitely compare it to the central to southern half of California is like the Swartland.
Nice. That's actually my favorite part too. My favorite region. Santanez. Team Santanez.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
So
beautiful.
I know it's so gorgeous there. And South Africa is naturally just beautiful landscape. So Syrah and Chenin Blanc, would you say that you were like a master in Syrah then? So like, I'm sure you've tasted a lot of Syrah from different parts of South Africa, different parts of the world. Is Syrah absolutely your favorite grape? Is that, because only Syrah and Chenin Blanc, like.
Yeah, I mean, the other varieties we work with complement those. So we work with mostly other Rhone varieties that go along with the Syrah and Rhone varieties that actually get blended in with the Chenin, which is a whole nother discussion. But as a Syrah, I mean, I adore Syrah. I feel that it's such an amazing chameleon of terroir. It really, wherever you plant it, Syrah picks up so much of the essence of that sense of place, for me, more than a lot of other varieties. So, you know, I love working with Chenin, absolutely. And Chenin in South Africa has its own unique identity that makes it very different than the Chenin in the Loire. But for me, Syrah, you can just move it just 1 kilometer to the left or the right, or a little bit more shade, or a little bit more sunshine, or a little bit more rain. And it absolutely amplifies those characteristics into what you're tasting in the glass. And that's why I love working with Syrah for that reason.
I love drinking Syrah for that reason, but I also feel like it also has this very unique characteristic that even though it could be different, if you have a Shiraz from Australia or Syrah from South Africa, they're gonna taste totally different, but then they still have this basic characteristic of this plum and this black pepper. It's just like if it comes first or if it comes second, just depends on where it's planted. And yeah, I love Syrah too. Okay, but let's open it up. Let's finish my Syrah fest and let's open it up for questions. Does anybody have any questions for Andrea?
I have a question. I wanted to know, this is Sheila. I'm in Los Angeles. And
Thanks for joining us, Sheila, all the way
I
from
know
LA.
I'm not gonna turn on my video. It's 3 a.m. I'm in the bed. But but I wanted to thank you so much. Just first of all, you've been so clear. I know you said you're not a lecturer, but you've been so clear. That's why I haven't had any questions.
Oh, good.
But I'm curious, Syrah is one of my favorite varietals. That's actually what I've been drinking for the last 2 days. And I wanted to ask, what's the impact on the flavors? It has to be a unique impact to have that granite and shale based soil that you have in Swartland.
So wait, just to be clear, you want to know the difference between the granite and the schist soils on the flavor profile of the grapes?
Yeah, how does that impact the flavor profile of the grapes?
Absolutely. So granite soils in the Swartland, although it looks like big granite chunks, when you drop them on the ground, it's actually a decomposed granite, so it'll shatter very, very easily. And that means that underneath the rocks, it's quite sandy, decomposed granite sand in the Swartland. So really deep into the soil. And vines always grow reflecting above the ground what's happening below the ground. So if you have deep roots, you have a much bigger leaf growing region on top, what's called the canopy. And when you have a bigger canopy, it means that you have more shade. So the grapes are growing in a slightly cooler condition than just being exposed to the sun. And when you have cooler growing conditions, you naturally then have slightly higher acidity, a lower pH. So the wines will always feel fresher. And wines with higher acidity reflect the tannin profile in a different way. It makes tannins more angular and more long when you have higher acidity wines. So what that means is it ages also in a long angular way. And because the grapes are growing in the shade, the cooler Syrah grows, the more floral and aromatic it becomes. So all of that is because of the granite soils in our case. So deeper roots means a bigger leaf growing area, which means it grows cooler, higher acidity, longer tannins, and more floral, more perfumed wine at the end of the day. And then on the schist soils, schist is like slate. Slate is what they make roof tiles out of. So in the vineyard, instead of being sandy and deep, you have these layers of rock, like roof tiles. And so when it rains, just like on a roof tile, the rain runs away. And that means that the roots never get quite as deep on the schist soils because the water has gone someplace else. There's nothing for the roots to reach for down lower. So with a smaller root system, it has a smaller canopy on top, but vines are very self-regulating. So a smaller canopy also means much smaller clusters, which means smaller berries, thicker skins. And so from the schist soils, because of the smaller roots, smaller canopy, everything more compact on the vine, all the flavors and all the tannins are much more compact as well. It means slightly lower acids, but slightly more firm tannins on the mouth because it's a higher skin to juice ratio. When you press the grapes, not as much juice comes out. So you get more color and more tannin from that.
Daddy. Yeah.
Oh my God, sorry about that, you guys. I had to kick Mike out. We had a hacker. Okay, he's gone. All right, so sorry about that.
That's it for me.
Okay, so did that answer the question, Sheila? That was very detailed. I love that explanation of the soil. I'm a soil freak. I'm not licking rocks, but I do like to just pick it up and feel it.
That answered the question. I just have one other question. You mentioned the term angular, and I haven't heard that before. Does that just refer directly to the potential for aging?
For me, it does. Yeah, I oftentimes think of I love tannins, and I'm such a nerd about tannins. You know, depending on where a wine is from and the way the tannin feels in your mouth determines for me, it's part of that terroir that you're tasting. So I always think of tannin in shapes. So for me, when I talk about angular tannins, yeah, it's like the length. So it might feel a little bit more firm and maybe a little bit more intense up front. But it also means that it can just keep going. To me, the granite soils have the longest aging potential in terms of tannins and will age in a very linear way. Whereas schist tannins for me, because of everything being more compact, on my palate, the tannins feel much more boxy, almost like square tannins on my palate. And the third soil that we work with for Syrah are iron soils, which are rich and heavy in clay. And that for me brings a lot of mid palate, and so therefore a lot of like round tannins on the palate.
So what's your favorite, round, square, or angular tannins? Or does it just depend on your mood?
For me?
Yeah, for you personally.
Yeah, I mean, I always like slightly more robust tannins. So I love more square tannins, like from our schist soils are probably my favorite on a given day. But then obviously there's like the mood drinking as well. Do I want something, you know, rounder and more opulent? Do I want something more more linear. But if I had to like, just on a given day, I'd probably go straight for the schist tannins, the square boxier tannins.
I love the way that you explain tannins. Okay, so this is an amazing masterclass, and it's such an honor to talk to somebody who's an amazing winemaker. If you guys have any more questions, I encourage you to ask your questions right now. This is the perfect time to ask any questions.
Yes, please. Hi, Tawani. Hi, Andrea.
Hi.
I just wanted to find out the viticulture you've explained. Do you push towards more of an organic and biodynamic style, or I mean, you're certainly not an industrial winery, so you're not going through and having lots and lots of fruit per hectare or per acre. Is that something that's important to Mullineux Family Wines? Are you moving in that direction?
Farming as naturally as possible is absolutely, for us, the most important factor in having quality wine at the end. Because if you go through and you spray things that are going to hurt the yeast or the positive bacteria that are on the grapes, you're going to hurt the overall quality at the end of the day of the fermented wine. We are not certified in anything. We do work with, we have a handful of vineyards that are certified organic. But we do not have a personal certification. So no matter how naturally we farm, we can't make any claims if you don't have the actual certification itself. For us, it's more important to live that lifestyle and farm that lifestyle and not use it for marketing reasons. So for as long as we know that we're farming the right way and we're having the end product be as reflective of the vineyards that we're trying to showcase, we probably won't be certified in the next couple of years. It is a 3-year certification process. But the farming way is the most important aspect of that, rather than the sticker on the bottle itself.
Sure. Thank you very much.
Hi, this is Michelle. Hi, everybody. Hi, Tawani. Hi, Andrea. Hi, everybody. I'm calling from outside of Washington, D.C. So it's early here, too. and you've been great, Andrea, by the way. I have a question about the vines. Again, you were talking about old vines earlier. Do you use a mixture of old and new, or do you primarily use old?
So in general, we use a mixture of old vineyards and new vineyards. As I mentioned, vineyard health trumps the age of the vine. Although we do work with South Africa's oldest vineyards, not all of them, but we are working with vineyards up to 120 years old. And we're also working with vineyards that are 3 years old. So we do have certain ranges of our wine, which are referred to as old vines. Let's see. Oh, I don't have one behind me right now. But our old vine wines, we do proudly state that they are old vines on the label. And there it's about, preserving heritage of the vineyards, promoting sustainability of viticulture. But it doesn't mean that young vines are inferior. They actually just add something else. So for example, I always like to think about like a dinner table. If you've got the whole family around the dinner table and you've got like the teenagers sitting there and they're super loud and they think they know everything, but they're full of like energy and vibrancy, and they actually like uplift the spirit of the whole table. And then you also have like the grandpa sitting at the table who's been maybe pretty quiet the whole time, but when they speak, they say something super profound. And that's kind of how I see vineyards. You either can have them together where they really work with each other to create a complete wine, or you can showcase their individual benefits separately in different bottlings as well.
Perfect way to explain it. And does that answer your question, Michelle?
Yes, I just have one more. How old, like how many years does a vine have to be to constitute being old? How old does it have to be considered old?
I didn't quite get the whole question.
So I think she said how, your connection is a little bit shaky, Michelle, so I'll ask the question. I think she said, how old does a vine have to be for it to be constituted as like old? Like what's old? Is it 20 years or is it 100 years?
So in South Africa, it's 35 years with a maximum of 15% interplantings of potentially of younger vines or blended into the wine. And in other countries, it's up to 50 years old is where they consider old vines, but it's allowed up to 50% interplantings or blendings. So on average around the world, it's usually between 35 and 50 years old are the vineyards. And the way that was determined in South Africa is the year in which Russo Kruger started the Old Vines Project, is it was essentially the top 1% of vineyard age that determined. So then the other 99% were considered young vines and the top 1% were considered old vines, which happened to be around 35 years.
Can I ask a question?
Yeah,
sure.
I'm not sure if you can hear me. What can we make generalizations about what, like, I liked your image of saying that old and young have different characteristics and they each bring something different to the table. So can you make generalizations about what young vines would bring and old wines would bring as far as like characteristics to about wine?
Sure. What's quite interesting for me is that once a vine becomes an old vine, any clonal differences in the different grapes tend to be taken over by the character of the vineyard itself. So, for example, clones of the same grape variety are planted for complexity within a vineyard or from block to block. And so, for example, with Pinot Noir, some are for more fruity characteristics or more spicy. Some make bigger grapes, some make smaller grapes. And in young vineyards, those absolutely all make a difference. But, maybe it's a personal opinion, reach their own level of maturity and become old vines, those clonal differences don't make as big of a difference. So then the site itself is what speaks the strongest about the vineyard, where it's planted, the soils, the microbes that have developed over the years, the climate, the rainfall, that all speaks much louder than the clonal differences itself. Old vines compared to young vines, the other main difference will be when it comes to seasonal differences in weather. In South Africa, we've been dealing with a massive drought since 2016. And our old vineyards are kind of cruising. They're like, oh, we've done this before. They've been weathered. They've built up their thick skin. They've built up their resistance, and that's something that takes time. Whereas the young vineyards have suffered much more in these drought years.
So it's truly just like old people and young people, where the old people are like, we've been through this before. We can get through it, and the young people are freaking out. I love it. What about oak? Can you talk about what kind of oak you guys are using at Mullineux? I would imagine it's mostly French oak.
Yes, we use predominantly French oak, and it's for more of the spice characters that you get from the oak. I don't use a lot of new wood. We use predominantly older barrels. Our barrels are up to probably about 20 years old right now. And we work with more and more large format vessels. I'm doing this, but it doesn't mean anything. My grandparents were Italian immigrants, so I speak a lot with my hands. So smaller barrels, it's going to be a greater wood to wine ratio. So you'll have more of an impact from the barrel on the wine. And then the larger vessels you start to use the oak as an aging vessel, but not a flavoring component. So from French oak, you get more spicy characteristics. From American oak, you tend to get more vanilla and coconut characteristics. You get maybe more coffee, you know, so it's a bit more aromatic in American oak, a bit more spice driven in French oak. So because we want it to be an aging vessel and not a flavoring component, we do tend to go for the more tight grained French vessels.
Nice. Anybody have any questions about the oak? Personally have been to the tasting room in French oak. Beautiful tasting room, and the staff there is absolutely awesome. Liz and Admire are doing a wonderful job. Please give them my love. I have a tasting room in Swartland as well.
So in the Swartland, because it's harder to get to, there's not as much foot traffic here. It's just a production facility, and we live here as well. So right now I'm sitting in the Swartland office at the Swartland Winery, and my house is like literally like right there. But in Franschhoek, where we make the Lieu Passant wines, because there's more foot traffic there, that's why we have our tasting room there, where you can taste all of our Lieu Passant wines and the Mullineux wines. So it's not that you have to taste from one winery and then go to the other winery. You can taste everything in one facility. As soon as it's open again.
I know, I can't wait. I have so many wonderful places. I just want to stop in and show so much love when we open back the world again.
Absolutely. No, I think we need to show a lot of love out there to the restaurants and wineries and even the little coffee shops that haven't been open. Everyone needs a lot of love, and I'm happy to give it.
Yes. Everyone pulling together and really just helping each and everyone. It's like each one teach one, each one buy something from somebody, do something. Yeah, I'm excited about what's gonna happen after this Corona thing, even a better place, this world. That's what I'm hoping for.
Yeah, I think it's brought out a lot of empathy in people, and just seeing this general, people working together as, as a family, as an industry, as a country. It's actually, the benefit out of the tragedy is this uplifting sense of community.
Yes, I agree. Andrea, please go over the types of soils in summary. So we talked about granite, we talked about schist. Are there any more types of soil that are in the Swartland on your vineyards?
Yes, so it's quite interesting. South Africa has some of the oldest viticultural soils in the world. And our soils have all been eroded away from what used to be one giant mountain in the Western Cape. So we have really large areas of single soil types. So we only work with about 4 different main soil types in the Swartland because they're very large areas of single soil types. Whereas in areas like California being a great example of tectonic action, all the soils are created by volcanoes and by the plates moving up off the ocean floor. Earthquakes and volcanoes create a lot of new soil. So when you're in California, in a vineyard the size of my office right here, you might have 3 or 4 different types of soil. In the Swartland, we can have 10 square kilometers of one single soil type. So yeah, I mentioned schist and granite. I mentioned the iron soils that give the round mid-palate, both on whites and on reds. It gives very soft, opulent wines. And then the 4th soil type we work with is quartz. Quartz is a very reflective stone, very, very white in color. And I love the character that gives to the vineyard because it reflects light that's coming from above up onto it reflects it back up into the canopy. So in those vineyards, you're tasting the sunshine that's coming from the top, but you're also tasting the sunshine that's coming up from the bottom. So you taste more, at the same sugar level, you get more of that spark, more spice, more depth of flavor on the quartz soils, even at lower sugar levels.
Does that answer your question? Do you guys have any more? Everyone?
Yes, please, if I may.
Okay.
Hi, Andrea. I had the great fortune of tasting your Cape Winemakers Guild white wine from last year that had spent 5 years in barrel. And it was absolutely phenomenal. Please, could you just explain a little bit more about that process? Because the flavor concentrations were out of this world. It was completely ethereal.
Cool, thank you. Yeah, that wine, so I mentioned Rioja and 5-year barrel aging earlier when I first started speaking, and that was the inspiration behind that wine. Other places in the world that also, well, one of the other main regions that does that is the Jura, for example, also in France. So they're often working with Chardonnay in that region. The wine that I made was a Chardonnay under the Libre label.
Yep.
The wine is called Radicales Libres, and it started because when we first started making our wines, they were fermented for 1 year in barrel, and we were very inspired by the wines of Rioja, specifically Vino Tondonia or Lopez de Heredia.
Oh, wait. Oh, sorry. 1 second. 1 second. Uh-oh. Sorry. Okay. There we
go. Cool. So we had these, we were very inspired by the wines of Lopez de Heredia, specifically a wine called Vino Tondonia, which is made from a grape called Viura, which is the typical white wine grape in Rioja. And it's dense, but light. It's just this flavor concentration. And the idea is that the longer you leave it in barrel, what's evaporating out typically is the water from the wine, the natural liquid from the wine, whereas the alcohol and the acid and the flavors all concentrate in that time. So it's almost like, when you make like a sauce reduction and you're evaporating off the steam, imagine that in a much longer, slower process. And that's typically what happens with extended barrel aged wines. And we love that style so much. We actually helped to create the category in South Africa. There was no category for that style of wine before. And all wine is approved by the government board that approves wine, the Wine and Spirits Board. And we had to kind of petition to get a 5-year barrel aged wine as a category in South Africa. So that's been approved. And yeah, so that's the inspiration behind the wine. And I just love it for its concentration, but not heaviness.
Nice. Does that answer your question, Carol? Wait, that was Carol.
Yeah.
Carol who answered.
Could you repeat the name of the wine that you were specifically talking about? I didn't get the name of the wine.
The wine in Spain, Lopez de Heredia.
Oh, I'm sorry, your wine that you created.
Oh, Radicales Libres. So it's Spanish for free radical. So we gave it a Spanish name because of its Spanish inspiration. And free radical is in reference to oxygen in wine, and the way that oxygen interacts with wine. By oxidizing the wine on purpose, it can take the wine into a whole nother level of development and creating those salty, almondy characteristics.
Okay, great. I'll have to try it.
A wine that I made for the Cape Winemakers Guild.
Excellent.
Nice. Okay, so Jova had a question. He said, Andrea, I understand that you guys focus more on old vines, which are more of the heritage vines to say. Do you have any plans to make Semillon, especially with your friendship project with Mullineux Family?
Yeah, so we, I do make an old vine Semillon Gris for Mullineux, or under the Mullineux label. So the Semillon Gris is from a 60-year-old vineyard. And then there are a lot of old vine Semillon vineyards in Franschhoek. I do hope to find one that works for me. I would love to make a Franschhoek old vine Semillon. I think that it could be an amazing signature, great for the region. There's already people making great Semillons in Franschhoek. I love the Boekenheidskloof one. I don't know if any of you have had it recently. they age so well, and they oftentimes hold back stock to be able to resell later on. So you can still get the older vintages of Buchanite's Franche Semillon on the market. And whenever I see a bottle, especially on a wine list, I'm like, that's what I'm ordering tonight.
I love it. Tips for the wine list.
Yeah.
And then Winston also, any more questions about the Semillon? You're good with that, Jovo? Okay. Winston had a question. He said, Andrea, I heard most winemakers are now opting for virus-free vines. Is this something you are looking forward to do?
Yes, so any of our plantings are virus-free. You can get essentially a certificate. It's a little tag that comes on the cuttings when you're going to plant them. So it's a long, expensive process to ensure that they're virus-free, but it's something that is a very important starting point, because you can't fix it later. Once it's in the ground, that's what you have, and it can infect all of your other vineyards. So working with virus-free vineyards is for me a no-brainer. It's definitely something we have to do, but not all vines are certified virus-free. So you have to be very careful about the nurseries from which you buy.
Great. Any more questions? I think you explained everything so well that people were like just taking notes. I know I was trying to take notes, monitor the chat, and listen to you all at the same time. Does anybody else have any questions before we let Andrea go?
This is fabulous.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Andrea, for joining us. It was truly a pleasure to have your expertise and your passion with us today. Thank you so much. If you guys have a chance, make sure you go to the Mullineux Facebook page, Instagram page, and send a big shout out, a big thank you to Andrea. When the world opens up again, please make sure you check out our wines. It's totally an experience, especially since you can say you've had a chat with her personally. So check out our wines whenever you can, and stay safe. So thank you so much, Andrea. We appreciate you.
No, thank you. And you guys stay safe, stay positive. I see your sign in the back. That's awesome. But no, it's been amazing to be able to do this. Thank you. And if anyone wants to email questions, I'm happy to answer them that way as well. Sometimes you only think of things or you realize that something wasn't so clear later on. Feel free to ask away. So thank you for having me, everyone.
All right. Well, thanks, Andrea. So we are going to stay on the call and we're going to continue to study. So we have about 40 more minutes left in our study group. So if you guys want to stay and go over some stuff in winemaking, talk about some stuff that Andrea talked about, process it, learn more, stay on the call, and we'll continue. Thanks so much, Andrea.
Bye.
Bye-bye. That was pretty awesome.
That was very clear.
Yeah, she was very clear. Like, I mean, I was taking notes. But yeah,
like 4 pages of notes. It's like,
she pretty much explained everything.
Yeah,
Right,
I love the 4 types of soil. Like that was just so clear. I don't think like it's ever been so clear. Like
right, and the effect that it has on the tannins, the way that she explained it, and even the way that she explained old vines versus new vines, and like what they each bring to the table.
Yeah,
so that was pretty amazing. Yay! All right. So next week we're actually going to have Joseph here from La Colombe, and he's going to be talking about tasting. So I hope you guys all come back on Tuesday for Joseph. Today, let's just finish talking about winemaking. That's the next chapter in the WSET study guide. There's not that much to cover since Andrea covered a lot, but I feel like we can just quickly go through, make sure that we understand everything that WSET says that we should study. And then there's a quiz that they have, and I feel like I'm gonna give you guys the quiz. You guys can write down the answers at home, and then we can just grade it together to see where we are. All right, so are you guys ready?
All right.
All right, let's do this. And remember, let's try to make it as interactive as possible. So I'm just going to open it up to chapter 5, and this is the 2020 study guide book. So I don't know if you guys can.
Mine is different.
Yeah, yours is different because yours is wine and spirits. But I'm on chapter 5. They changed it so they're not doing the spirits anymore. They're only doing the wine. And so basically, it's just talking about. I'm just gonna hop right into it. All right. Let me see. I'm gonna unmute. Wait a second. I have a new message. Let's see. I'm gonna unmute everyone. Okay. Oh, you're welcome, Monica. Okay. All right. So, and if you have to jump off the call, that's fine too. But let's just start studying. So, we're going to talk about the winemaking process, the process of making wine. And Andrea talked about the different steps, but let's just go talk about them right now. So first you have the crushing, basically when they just tear the berry a little bit and try to extract the juice. And remember, there's going to be 2 routes. So you're going to have the white wine and then you're going to have the red wine. So we're going to talk about white wine. I'm going to mute everybody. If you have a question, just send me a chat, just because it's kind of loud, or if you want to add something, just, or maybe I can leave everybody unmuted and then you can just mute your phone yourself or your, I'm going to mute everybody. Okay. All right, so everybody is muted. If you have a question, just type it in the chat, all right? So basically, you have, for white wine, you have your crushing stage, and then you press the wine, which basically extracts all the juice out of it, and then you ferment that. And the first fermentation starts with just the natural yeast that comes off of the skins when you're pressing it, right? And then some winemakers might add more yeast. Some people might just go with that natural yeast. And then that's when you start the alcoholic fermentation process. So for white grapes, you press it and then you start the alcoholic fermentation process. And then you pretty much store it, bottle it, or you might put it in stainless steel tanks, or you might put it in barrels. All right. And then for red wine, the difference is you crush it and then you start the alcoholic fermentation process and then you press it. So that's pretty key, because I've taken the test before and I know that was one of the questions on the test was like, what's the difference, or like, you know, the steps in the winemaking process for red and whites. So that's something that I would encourage you guys to really understand the difference in that. And then something that you get from the skin of the grapes is the color and the tannins. What else? Let's see. Punch downs. Andrea talked about punch downs. Any more questions? No more questions? Nobody has anything to add about the winemaking process? Andrea probably went over it. We probably don't need to even go over all of this. Let's see. She talked about the different oak barrel, the different oaks you can have, French oak, American oak. Let's see. I'm just looking through the book to see if there's anything that she didn't cover. One thing that she didn't cover was malolactic fermentation. She didn't really talk about what that is. Does anybody want to explain what malolactic fermentation is? I'm just going to unmute everybody. All right. Anybody? Malolactic fermentation? Nobody? Who knows what it is? Anybody know what it is? All right. So, should I
can say something about it. Huh? Even though I'm in a place that is a bit noisy. Can you hear me?
Please do, because I feel like I'm just the one talking. Yeah, I can hear you fine.
I'm in a place that is a bit noisy. That's why I kept on staying and muted all through. But anyway, I can say something about malolactic fermentation. We're talking about changing the malic acid into a lesser fresh lactic acid. And basically that's it about malolactic fermentation, just trying to transform that very tart, harsh acid into something that is less or more palatable kind of an acid that is probably found in lactose and milk. Yeah, I think that's it about the malolactic fermentation. Yeah.
Exactly. So I don't know if you guys could all hear Silas because his background is a little bit. He's basically saying you're taking the molecules and you're changing them to something that's not taking this acid that's called mallow, and then you're changing it to. So you're basically taking mallow acid and then you're changing it to something that's more creamier, to lactic from this sour acid, and you're adding this lactic acid to smooth out this harsh mallow acid. You see this happen a lot in Chardonnays, especially like there wasn't like Chardonnays, especially California Chardonnays, because they said that they were overly mallow, which means that they took away so much of the natural sour acid and they covered it up with this lactic acid that made it super buttery, just like unbelievably creamy. That was the old school, like 1980s style of Chardonnay. So anytime you hear one that's like overly buttery, overly creamy, and you can probably guess that it's overly mallow fermentation. Any questions about the mallow fermentation process, mallow lactic fermentation process? All right.
Using bacteria though, right? Are they using bacteria in that process?
I wouldn't necessarily say that it's bacteria, they're acids. So there are two types of different acids. So it's like this lactic acid. I'm not really a scientist, so scientific like that. So I wouldn't know if it's a bacteria that you're getting the acid from or if it's just the acid. But I know that it's definitely lactic acid. Okay, that's a good question to figure out, like for the next time. I expect us to do some homework to find out what actually lactic is.
Can I answer that?
Oh, yes, please.
Yeah. So malolactic fermentation is a process whereby malic acid is degraded by lactic bacteria, transforming them into lactic acids.
Thank you. So you're right, Michelle, it's a bacteria. So the lactic is bacteria, mallow is the acid. So thanks, Lennox, for that explanation.
Sure.
Can I ask you, can you talk more about how you can overdo the malolactic fermentation? How do you get the right balance so it's not overly creamy? You talked about, I immediately thought about Inglenook from the 70s and 80s. super buttery.
Yeah, I'm not really sure because I'm not a winemaker. I just know that it's a process. Like malolactic can happen a little bit naturally in the wine, but then it's the lactic bacteria. So, and then maybe if they're adding too much, I'm not sure. That would be a question for a winemaker. So put that in your pocket because we will pin it because we will have more wine going forward. So I think that could be something that we can actually have them talk about how that process actually works, how they control that process.
Okay.
Yes, but first to know that mallow is the sour acid, lactic is the bacteria that they use to calm that sour acid down for right now. One other thing to think about was lees. So anybody want to explain what lees are, or like leaving a wine on the lees?
Lees are, it's the dead yeast cells.
What? Well, maybe I will. I'm gonna mute everyone and let you have the answer. Wait. Go back and say what you were gonna say.
Yeah, I was just gonna say that the lees are the dead yeast cells.
Yes. So after you have,
but they would just leave in there because it gives it different flavors.
Like a little bit more body, a little bit more complex flavors. Sometimes if you have a white wine that smells a little bready, that's because it could be left in contact with the lees. It happens a lot in sparkling wine or champagne. But then it happens a lot too. It happens sometimes with white wines when they wanted to give it a little bit more character. Very good. All right, so do you guys want to take like a little quiz, or do you guys want to talk some more about the winemaking process? I think Andrea went over a lot. Okay, let's just take a little quiz with the next 20 minutes that we have left. So if you just get a piece of paper, I'm gonna ask some questions from the study guide. And then we can just go over the answers together. So actually it looks like there's only about 8 questions. So let's see, Let's see. All right, so are you guys ready? Who's gonna take the quiz? If you're gonna take the quiz, just raise your hand or say something. All right, so let's do this. All right, question number 1. What does the pulp of a grape mainly contain? What does the pulp of a grape mainly contain? A, tannins and sugar. B, water and sugar. C, acid and tannins. Or D, sugar and yeast. I think maybe we should just answer them right now. Who has the answer? Type it, or you wanna?
Water and sugar.
Water and sugar. Does everybody agree with that? Okay. If you think it's something different, just write it in the chat. Just write it in the chat. So the pulp contains water and sugar. That's mostly what it contains, is water and sugar. Question number 2. What does a vine need for photosynthesis? A, sunlight and minerals. B, sugar and oxygen. C, tannins and sugar. D, sunlight and carbon dioxide. So we probably all passed 8th grade science. We should know this. Does anybody have an answer for me? Let's see. I'm gonna unmute everybody. Anybody have an answer?
D.
D, yeah.
We all agree that it's D, right? Sunlight and carbon dioxide. Yay, that's absolutely correct. All right. In which season do flower clusters form? This is from the call from yesterday, because we talked about this with Jeffrey. In what season do flower clusters form? A, summer. B, spring. C, winter. Or D, autumn. Does anybody have an answer for me? Okay. What season does the flower cluster form?
Maybe autumn.
Spring.
I think it's spring.
Okay, how many people say spring? How many people say spring?
Spring.
How many people say not spring? It's definitely spring. So remember we talked about in the grape growing process, most of the activity happens in the spring. In the winter, they're pretty dormant. And then in the spring, that's when they start to flower. That's when they start to have the fruit set. And all the work is done in the spring. Okay, question number 4. Which of the following statements best describes the change in black grapes as they ripen? A, the color changes from purple to dark green and acidity levels will decrease. B, the sugar increases and all the flavors become more herbaceous. C, the color changes from dark green to purple and acidity levels increase. Or D, the sugar increase and the flavors change from fresh to cooked fruit. Which of the following statements best describe the changes in black grapes as they ripen? A, B, C, or D? Okay, anybody have any answers for me? Anybody? So as black grapes or red wine grapes, as they develop, as they ripen, the sugar increases and the flavors change from fresh to cooked fruit. According to the WSET book, that's what it says. So more sugars, flavors change from fresh to cooked fruit. All right, so next question. What are the ideal conditions for botrytis noble rot to grow? A, cool nights, warm, dry mornings. B, warm, dry mornings and damp, misty afternoons. C, damp, misty mornings and rainy afternoons. Or D, that was C, I'm sorry, or D, damp, misty mornings and warm, dry afternoons. So for botrytis to grow, what are the best conditions? Okay, Jeffius, he says D. Okay, let's see. Anybody else say anything? C. So C, damp, misty mornings and rainy afternoons.
Yeah.
All right, anybody else have anything else? Michelle, I can't hear you. What did you say?
Hear me now?
Yeah, it's very shaky.
I said damp, misty mornings and warm, dry afternoon.
Okay, that is absolutely the correct answer. So those of you who said D, that's the correct answer. So you want to have those damp mornings so you can get all that fungus to grow, but then you want to have this warm afternoon so it can kind of dry out and then the grapes continue with their process. So D is the correct answer. Okay, this is a good one. Which latitude, north and south of the equator, mark the zones where most vineyards are found? I don't even think this should be multiple choice. I think you guys should just tell me what the answer is. But I'm gonna go over the multiple choice just in case you guys don't know this. A, 40 and 50 degrees. B, 30 and 50 degrees. C, 20 and 40 degrees. D, 30 and 40 degrees. What are the ideal latitudes?
B.
B, is that your final
B.
answer? Yes.
Yeah.
B? Okay, I think we all agree that B. Does anybody say anything other than B? Yeah, B is the correct answer. I think I want to get a tattoo that says 30 to 50. Next question. The vineyards of the Northern Europe are warmed by, A, fog, B, ocean currents from the Caribbean, C, warm air from the mountains, or D, high levels of rain.
Warmed?
It's warm, it makes it warm. So like, you know, bodies of water usually add to like the warmth of a region. So what?
I think it's the warm air from the Caribbean.
Caribbean.
The warm air from the Caribbean? B,
Yeah.
okay. So does anybody say anything different than B? B is absolutely the right answer, which is amazing though, because I'm thinking the Caribbean is so far away, but still those warm air currents are able to travel all the way to Europe. So the correct answer is B. European vineyards are warmed by the Caribbean currents. All right, we're almost to the end, you guys. All right, any questions so far? All right, so we have 1, 2, 3 more questions. So 8, which one of the following statements is true? A, very good or outstanding wines can only be made from hand harvested grapes. B, very good or outstanding wines can only be made from machine harvested grapes. C, very good or outstanding wines can be made from both hand and machine harvested grapes. Or D, very good or outstanding wines cannot be made from machine harvested grapes.
C.
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 Everybody says C?
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's I think that's the right answer. C. Very good and outstanding wines can be made from both hand and machine harvested grapes. I prefer hand harvested myself, but okay, we'll give them that. So the correct answer is C, everyone. Question number 9. Which of the following is a French labeling term used to indicate a wine with a protected designation of origin, PDO? A, Appellation d'origine contrôlée. Please don't laugh at my French. B, qualitas wine. C, vin de pays. Or D, indication géographique protégée.
I would say,
Hey,
yeah, A.
A, does anybody say anything different than A? A is the correct answer. I'm glad you guys were able to decipher that with my bad French and all. AOC is what it's also called. So that's correct answer. Last question is, which of the following statements is correct? A, late harvest wine can only be made from grapes from old vines. B, a late harvest wine will always be dry and low in alcohol. C, a late harvest wine could be dry, off dry, medium, or sweet. D, a late harvest wine can only be labeled vintages tardifs in Italy. I know I said that wrong.
Okay.
So,
I think it's
Yeah,
C.
I believe the last
C.
one also means late harvest.
C maybe.
C, a late harvest wine can be dry, off dry, or medium, or sweet.
Mm.
I'm surprised that it could be dry.
I'm surprised.
Yeah.
I don't know
They
if
can. There's
Question, like a trick question or something.
I know. I feel like this last one is definitely a trick question. But let's see. So somebody says C. Anybody have anything else? A late harvest wine can only be labeled vintage tardifs in Italy. I know I'm saying it wrong. Do you guys want me to spell it, or you guys understand what I'm saying?
No.
Yes,
It could
yes,
be.
that also means late harvest. I
It
think.
means late harvest, but is it actually? It almost sounds like French. Vendange
It's Italian.
It's definitely Italian. I'll
Okay.
write it in the comments. Let me see.
Well, yeah, maybe it could be. It would make sense that it would be D, right? Because how
It
could
is
they
D.
label it something else? Because I
I
don't
don't
think
think
late
it's D.
harvest could be dry. It's always sweet,
I
right?
think it's
It can be dry, yeah.
it can be. I've had dry late harvests.
Oh wow. Okay, I never.
Wow.
Okay.
question. So
See, I
I'm gonna
have not had enough wine in my life yet.
Never.
I need to taste the dry late harvest wine. Oh my
Yeah, so the answer is C. A late harvest wine can be dry, off dry, medium, or sweet. Very good. Thank you, Carol.
Pleasure.
So that, I feel like these are so true to questions that could actually be on the WSET exam. So because I remember some of these questions being on the test. So yeah, just you guys did a very good job. I think we only missed that last one. Well, Carol got it right, but yes. All right,
I feel like the practice